I think that's like with anything in life, with business, with work, with personal life. It's just having a goal. And like maybe it doesn't have to be so stringent as like having a business plan for your marriage, but you got to have a plan of what you want to do someday. You're right. And I recognize the reason we got a financial advisor is because how do we combine our finances? And we know we don't know how to do that. And so we're like, what's the best way to do that? And having a neutral third party, that's why people get therapists. That's why people get coaches. Same thing with financial advisors, getting somebody who's an expert in that thing and they're neutral. So they don't have that same emotional connection to what your own money and your own stuff.
Welcome to Money Matters, the podcast that transforms your financial chaos into financial clarity. I'm Christopher Hensley, here to guide you through the complexities of money and relationships. Picture this. It's the end of the month and you're sitting down with your partner, bills in hand. The tension is palpable. How do you start the conversation without spiraling into conflict? Today, we're lucky to have Chris Wong, a seasoned therapist and expert in navigating these exact conversations. Together, we'll explore not just why these talks are tough, but how we can handle them with confidence and with compassion. Stay with us to the end to discover key strategies for financial harmony that can change not just your bank balance, but your relationship dynamics. This isn't just about getting through a tough talk. It's about building a foundation of understanding and respect that lasts. Let's get started. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Love to be here. Love to be talking to another Christopher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you have a podcast as well. So before we kind of dive into this, maybe share a little bit about your podcast with listeners so that we can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, I have a podcast, The Art and Science of Difficult Conversations. And it came out of myself and somebody I met, Lucy, who's my co-host. And we're in the similar space. We're both executive coaches. And we were finding that people really struggle with difficult conversations of all sorts at work, in personal life. And some of them were asking, how do you have this conversation? And so it really came out of how do we provide these role plays for our clients and for other people who are struggling with how do I talk with an underperforming employee? How do I get my spouse to do more chores around the house? How do I have these conversations? And so we turned it into that. And it's been a cool experience, cool journey to
I love it.
Share.
I love it. I love it because that was when I learned about your podcast, the format of you had a couple different formats there, and one of them was a role play, which I have not heard of on a podcast before. I think that's very unique and a neat way to get access to this information for sure. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Let's just dive right into it. This topic I think is a good one for all of us. I'm actually on May 18th. That is my 28-year anniversary. After 28 years, this is still, we still have conversations about money all the time. It's work, right? Being in a relationship and making sure everybody is on the same page. How should couples begin discussing their financial goals and concerns, and what foundational steps are crucial for a healthy dialogue?
I'm actually going to flip that question in order. I think the foundational elements is you need to have good communication about everything. This is one of those topics that we all bring our own hangups and how we were raised to think about money. And so the foundation is, do you even have a venue or a way for both of you to have that honest conversation? Do you have a way that you can share and you can share your opinion without feeling like you're being be ridiculed or made fun of or pressured to think one way or the other? And can you just even have that insight to share with yourself? Like, this is actually what I think about money. I think of it as we need to save as much as possible because I grew up in a culture where we saved every last penny and we never spent any money. And so it freaks me out that we have to buy this couch or this bed or spend money on this new water heater. Every time we have to spend money, it freaks me out. So part of that is also a conversation with ourselves is, what are we comfortable with? What are we taught about and raised to think about money?
That's a good way to think about it, starting from the broad idea of just having good communication, right? Not just about money, but being able to talk to each other without feeling, blame or having just a good way to come about that. You talked about, as it goes to money, right? Examples, a hot water heater, that's a good one. All of these things, there's a dollar sign and a price tag attached to them. So being able to really have the insight with yourself to know that, how have I formed these
Mhm.
ideas when it comes to money? This can lead to conflicts sometimes, right? So we hope it doesn't, but sometimes it does. Um, in your experience as a therapist, what are the common financial conflicts among couples, and what strategies do we need to recommend for resolving?
Yeah, I think it's that one of those examples I gave is just one person grew up really stingy, not stingy, but really just focused on hoarding money, right?
Mhm.
And the other person grew up like really loose with money, really thinking everything. It's okay to buy stuff. If you need something, just buy it. Don't stress about it. My wife and I don't stress too much about money because we had a good financial advisor, but there are times when that shows up because I grew up in a very more save your money, hoard your money. And so I think of like, I don't want to spend money on stuff. I don't want to, buy something if we don't absolutely need it. But my wife grew up in like, she also didn't grow up with a lot of money, but her philosophy was if you have the money and you need something, just buy it. And so it's still, but that stresses me out to think like that. So it's having that conversation ahead of time, like what rational, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. And I think part of it is sitting down and if you're in a married couple or relationship where you're sharing finances, what are your goals with that money? Do you see it as let's just save as much money as possible? Are your goals let's live life to the fullest degree and not worry about that? One of that is like a very short term view, one of it is a very long term view, and neither is wrong or none's better or worse than the other, right? It's just more what are your goals together as a couple, and how will you decide what that goal is?
So there's two things I picked up when you just shared that with us. One was the idea that looking at just having that conversation about goals with money. It sounds simple enough to do, but I don't think a lot of people are doing it. Actually having that conversation with thought, what are we trying to do with this? And the other thing that I picked up on is that you mentioned you had a financial advisor. Here you are, a therapist who's trained, to speak with, and to have these conversations, but you're tapping a financial advisor to have those conversations with your spouse. Let's dive a little bit, deeper into that. When just talking about financial planning, can you discuss the importance of strategic planning in relationships? And how should couples align their financial strategies with their life goals?
I think that's like with anything in life, with business, with work, with personal life. It's just having a goal, and like maybe it doesn't have to be so stringent as like having a business plan for your marriage, but you got to have a plan of what you want to do someday, right? And I recognize the reason we got a financial advisor is because how do we combine our finances? And we know we don't know how to do that. And so we're like, what's the best way to do that? And having a neutral third party, that's why people get therapists. That's why people get coaches. Same thing with financial advisors, getting somebody who's an expert in that thing and they're neutral. So they don't have that same emotional connection to what your own money and your own stuff. They can look at it logically, look at what are your goals and how is the best way to reach your goals step by step. And knowing that it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Especially if you're thinking like, how do we save our money for retirement and, future wealth? But whatever your goals are, it's really what is the goals and then what are the logical steps to get there.
I love that. I love that. So that you're, shared with us why you have used a financial advisor for this. You mentioned the words combining finances or combining your households into one. So this popped into my head here. This is a difficult conversation as we're
Mhm.
having difficult conversations here that I have with clients or people that I bring on to my practice.
Mhm.
Um, because of the age group that I'm working with, uh, a lot of times I'm getting people who are 55 and up who are in a second marriage, right?
Mhm.
And so, where some people combine their finances, some people don't, and it's because they've had they've been burned.
Sure.
Usually, but by the time they get to me, if I ask them and they separate their finances and they get remarried, so we're talking about a second marriage,
Yep.
and they've decided to get married, but they're not 100% about combining the finances because they've often had these stories, these things that have happened in the past. But where that can come in to bite them is that they might operate it siloed, right? But with the estate planning, if you're in a state where it's joint title, what you think's happening with the assets may not happen. Like you may have siloed them separately, right? Mentally
Right.
for the accounting there. How would you handle, is there a different way to come at these conversations with different generation, with that different age demographic?
Yeah, and I don't know your approach well enough to like. I don't want to necessarily tell you how to do your work because I'm sure you're good at it. I would say dig into that emotional reason. I think that's because we all make that's how we make our decisions. Really, it's just emotionally from our gut. So really digging into that, what their fear is, what their worry is on both sides. If they're getting remarried and they're worried about something happening, they don't want to get burned again. Reasonable. I dig into that. Like, what is your
Yeah.
concern about getting burned again? What's your fear of something happening? And then if they're marrying somebody who's like dead set on like we have to combine our finances because that to me shows commitment. What's going on for them emotionally? What's the importance there for them? And I think that's where you need to negotiate is thinking about what are those emotional needs they're trying to fill or trying to avoid? What are they trying to avoid? What pain are they trying to avoid? And how can you best work together to meet both needs? Like, how can you provide that security and show that commitment? Right. And it can't be a just a positional thing. Right. And so an example I use is a husband and wife who a husband does not wants a fake Christmas tree and the wife wants a real Christmas tree. And the husband's like, but it's too much work. A plastic one is easier to take care of and store. You can reuse it. And the wife's like, but this one, it smells like Christmas. This is like the real Christmas spirit, like that tradition of going to a Christmas tree farm and picking out a tree. And like those are just positions. Those are just like surface level things. But if you dig deeper, the husband doesn't really have a reason. He just doesn't want to deal with it. But the wife's like, you know what? This reminds me of my dad, and he passed away a couple of years ago, and he used to always bring us. So like, this really means a lot to me because it connects me with my dad, and that's important. And so the husband says, okay, let's get the real Christmas tree because that makes more sense. But if you just deal with like the surface level things, logistically, like depends on what more is important to you. But getting to the emotional core, that makes it easier to determine what's your actual need that you're trying to fill.
I love it. That's a really good answer to that question there. I try not to, I never pass judgment on clients. Whatever they want to do, that's fine. But making sure that they understand the ramifications of that. And especially when people pass away, if they've got blended families with children and there may be expectations there that they just haven't discussed. And so that's one of the reasons we have that conversation. Transparency in finances. How important is transparency about finances in a relationship? What are the risks and the benefits of maintaining separate versus joint accounts? More of the first part of that is really how important is transparency about finances in a relationship?
I mean, I think importance in general, just the same as everything else with communication, right? It's just being transparent about what's going on because otherwise you're just leaving the other person to assume certain things. They're just going to fill in, no matter what, the other person's going to fill in their own story of what's happening and why it's happening. Are you hiding your finances because you're trying to store money somewhere to hide something else? Or have you just been like buying scratch tickets every day, and so you actually have a gambling problem you're trying to hide, and so like your spouse is like they think you're having like a second life, and you have a gambling problem you need help with. So that's
Absolutely.
so important to help get on the same page, and I think every relationship's gonna be different, right? Like I get that some relationships you might want to be that transparent, and maybe your spouse or your partner just isn't there with you in the same level. So like you want to be transparent, and they're not necessarily supportive of that, or they're not curious. They're just passing judgment too quickly, or being reactive to whatever you're sharing. So that kind of shuts it down. So yes, it's important to be transparent. It's also just important for the other partner to be able to be open and listen and think about how because especially once you're married, it's you two together trying to solve this problem. You're not against each other. It's you trying to solve this problem together.
I love that. That's how, after 28 years, we look at ourselves as a team.
Hmm.
We're working together as a team, and it's always good to have to have that in our minds when we're trying to make decisions. So this was, the idea of if you aren't transparent, the person might actually fill in the gap for the story that they have, and it may not be the correct story. And there is a danger there. And then getting you use the idea of a gambling addiction. That is a problem, right? And two people can get past that. But if they don't know, you could see where that could really just drive a wedge between a relationship. So being transparent can really help with the idea of communication there. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about cultural influences. How do cultural backgrounds influence a couple's approach to money management? And what advice do you have for couples from diverse backgrounds?
Hmm. It's gonna. I think it's. I'm gonna sound like a broken record. It's the cultural differences are so important because they influence how we look at money, how we spend money, who's in charge of the money. Like I'm a big proponent. I keep talking about like being transparent, communicating. And what if you come from a culture where only one person has power over the finances, and that's how they view it? Like that's how it should be. I don't like the idea of it seems in pop culture, like now there's like this idea of like you should essentially have a checklist of things you talk about on a first date with people to determine if it's a good fit or not. I'm not saying you got to talk about this on the first date, but if it gets serious, when it starts getting serious, you should be talking about this. What is your expectation of money? Is it we share it to 50-50? Is it you believe one person should have control of all the finances and I just get like, and the other person just gets an allowance, quote unquote, or something? Or is it like we're jointly working together through all of this stuff where we're putting all the money into a joint account? I've seen lots of different ways. I've seen marriages where people have joint accounts forever and they never have a joint accounts. They have a split accounts and it works out well. They figure out how to like manage all the bills and the mortgage and all this stuff just fine. And some people will like have a joint and that works too for them. It just depends on your personality and your culture, but it comes down to, are you willing to talk about it and kind of come to figure out how do we collaborate and figure this out together?
I love that answer. That's a great answer. It may not be the first date, but money is pretty important.
Yeah.
If you get that answer that you gave earlier, if somebody gets an allowance, that might be a deal breaker for some people, right? And to get that to bubble up in the first couple of dates or conversations, they're not a bad thing. So I love what you're saying there. That makes a lot of sense. When it comes to challenges for modern couples, how have financial challenges for couples evolved with modern economic conditions such as gig economy or digital currencies? Any thoughts on that?
I don't know if I have any thoughts on like the like digital currencies because I just don't know enough about that.
Me neither.
I assume it's for me, maybe because I'm just older. I assume it's very risky, but maybe it's super safe. I don't know. I will say this: the gig economy, it's very similar to anybody that works for themselves. It's just more unstable revenue streams, right? Like it's going to be ups and downs. You might hit huge months, you might hit really low months. And so you have to think about it together. How are you going to manage through that? And what's realistic? I think we all understand that that the inflation is really happening. No matter what, the larger indicators are saying, like prices are going up for lots of different things. Rent is going up. It's getting more expensive to just live daily life. And so I think that has to be a real question is what's realistic for us in terms of where we're going to live and the lifestyle we want to do. And gig economy, I think, is great for people that love flexibility. I think they got to be honest with themselves and with each other too. That means it's not going to be a stable income, which means you have to be even more thoughtful about saving and thoughtful about where you spend your money and how you spend your money. Do we all wish it was different? Yeah, we all wish it was different. And there's nothing, one person by themselves is not going to solve it. So we need to figure out like how we're going to live within this situation. And then we can work on public advocacy and kind of societal issues as a group, but individually we got to figure out how we're going to live in this system that we're in right now.
I love that. Yeah, we probably have personal opinions as far as the wage of a gig worker and how that could be changed, but you're saying what we're left to deal with is the reality of here's how it is, right? And so we've got this lumpy budgeting. It's almost like a self-employed where you might
Yeah.
have a good month, you might have a down month, and it's peaks and valleys. And so being really realistic as a couple together, I think that's great advice there. Are there any specific tools or resources that you recommend couples trying to manage their finances better?
Yeah, I love there's a couple of Instagram influencers that I see every now and then. I don't know if you need to go this extreme, but they are couples and they have like this period where they meet like every Sunday night and go over their finances and like their emotional health and all their marriage and things like that. Um that seems like a lot. They say they spend like an hour and a half doing this every Sunday night.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. I have 2 kids, so I don't know how much we're gonna spend time doing that. But it is worth doing, like, regular checkups in your
Right. Right.
finances, right? Like, check, like, are we ex where we expected to be? Let's check, do we need to do something different? Do we need to, stop going out as much? Do we need can we go out more? Have we ever had, like, a really good period of savings? And, we have a travel fund or entertainment fund. We built that up a little bit. So let's start living a little. Let's start, like, let's plan a vacation, but having that regular review helps. And as a person, like I'm self-employed and I dread doing the bookkeeping because I hate looking at the money.
Yeah.
But like I
Yeah.
know I force myself to do it because I know I have to make sure like that nothing is out of the ordinary. But I just dread looking at it because I don't want to look at potential bad news of like, oh, I lost this much money. No, I have to do it because it's just important to the work. I get it. Like if both people in a relationship don't want to do it, then that makes it even worse.
It's a harder thing for sure. So I love that, the idea of the weekly meetings and, you gave an example, maybe an extreme where they're meeting every week and it's almost like a CEO of
Yeah.
the marriage. I think that's awesome, but could I do I don't know. But you also said, well, realistically, just the check-ins to do a temperature check. Where are we at on this? You gave the examples of, having your entertainment fund set aside so that now you don't feel guilty, right? Because you've actually got some
Yep.
money in there. It's like, hey, we can go to the movies, we can go out to eat. I think those are all really good examples and ideas for couples. We've got just about 5 minutes before the show's over. How does the psychological aspect of money affect relationships, and what can couples do to address any negative impacts?
Yeah, I think I think it goes back to your expectations of what you think the other person will do or won't do. You know, I keep thinking of like the person that's really more guarding of their money because that's just my perspective. I don't want to call anyone else out, so I'll use my perspective. If you have that
Right.
and your spouse is like spending lots of money or just even like willing to buy clothes for herself or himself, um, you're gonna look at it and you're gonna start getting resentful, especially if you're not talking about it. You're gonna be like, "Why aren't they saving money? We got like a kid on the way. Like, don't they notice what we're doing here?" And so, if we don't have those conversations, it just breeds resentment, and then we start getting bitter, and then we start thinking about it, or we hold it in ourselves. We try not to be resentful, so it just creates anxiety. Like, what am I gonna do? Do I have to work harder? Do I have to get a second job? Is it on me to figure this out? So it just makes it worse and worse, and it spirals. And then, that honest communication, there's nothing that's going to beat that, about finances, about, intimacy, about sex, about kids. Like nothing will beat an open and honest conversation where you're both willing to have that conversation and both able to listen and work together to come to a resolution.
I love it. I love it. Chris, we could have talked for the rest of the day here.
Yeah.
We're just about 3 minutes away from the end of the show. So now tell me a little bit, because I'm going to ask where listeners who want to find out more about you, where they can find out more about you. But I want you to talk a little bit about what you do professionally, which I think deals more with leadership and from a corporate coaching aspect. But can you tell us a little bit more about that so that we
Yeah.
can get to know that about you?
Yeah, sure. So I still do therapy on the side.
Mhm.
But it only affects people that live in Massachusetts. So if you have listeners elsewhere, that doesn't matter. But what I do, my main job is I'm an executive coach and consultant. So I work with nonprofit executive directors, really helping them to fix dysfunctional cultures, creating high performing organizations so they can execute their strategic plan.
I love it. I love it. So the stuff that we talk about on a couple level, think about it at a group and a dysfunctional office or a business
Yep.
model or workspace. We need this everywhere. The last thing you just said about, good, honest communication, just having those conversations, super, super important there. Chris, and for people who do want to find out more, where can they go to find out about you?
Yeah. So they can find my website, myleadershippotential.com. On social media, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, I'm Chris Wong, LMHC. That's where you can find me, get into the conversation with me. You can always email me, chris@myleadershippotential.com. And as we mentioned at the beginning, I have my own podcast with the co-host Lucy, the art and science of difficult conversations. You can catch that anywhere you get your podcasts. And we're about to be finishing our first season, so we're rolling into our second season. And yeah, I think people, for the people that have found it, they seem to enjoy it, and so we're going to keep building out and keep making it better.
I love it. Congrats on that. That's a good first season there, and you've got some traction going. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. Have a good rest of the day there.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for having me on. Love talking about it.